Everybody, my name is Bethany Kwan. You are at the Accords Qualitative and Mixed Methods seminar mini-series today. If you're not familiar with Accords, we are a transdisciplinary research group here at the University of Colorado, supported by the School of Medicine and Children's Hospital, Colorado. We conduct pragmatic research in real-world settings to improve health care and outcomes. And we have strong methods cores and programs led by national experts. We do consultations and team building for grant proposals. We offer mentorship training and support for junior faculty. And we have extensive educational offerings both locally and nationally, including seminar series like this. Next slide, please. I'd like to alert you to some upcoming events within Accords. On April 6th, we have our Community Engagement Forum in partnership with the CCTSI Community Engagement Core. And this is a part 2 of a conversation that we had ago on understanding and appreciating the capacities of the community and building partnerships. On April 11th, we have our Learning Health Systems, Models and Methods for Embedded Research seminar series, continuing with a panel discussion with Colorado-based learning health system models, including the experience of Kaiser Permanente Colorado, Denver Health, and Denver VA. On April 20th, we have our Qualitative and Mixed Methods mini-series continuing with Dr. Karen Albright presenting on rapid qualitative analysis. This is a great topic. I'm really excited about this one. And then very exciting, May 23rd, 24th, and 25th, we have our Colorado Pragmatic Research and Health Conference, or CopperCon. If you've attended this in the past, it's a fantastic conference. We have speakers coming from all over the country and other countries as well. And this year's theme is on disseminating, scaling, and sustaining pragmatic research. And the registration is now open. If you work here on the CU Anschutz campus or you are a CCTSI member, then the registration is free. And we are currently collecting poster abstracts, and the deadline is March 28th. To register and to find out more, you can visit coppercon.com. Next slide. So today for our Qualitative and Mixed Methods mini-series, we're very excited to have Dr. Sheana Bull, who's a professor in community and behavioral health at the University of Colorado, as well as the director of the mHealth Impact Lab, joining us. Dr. Bull is a researcher who's focused on the design, development, implementation, and evaluation of mobile and digital solutions to improve primary prevention and self-management of chronic conditions. She has a particular interest in using technology for health promotion among populations that face disparities in health outcomes. And she frequently utilizes technology to gather qualitative and quantitative data across all phases of research. I'm sure there are those of you in the audience who have participated in courses that Dr. Bull has led. They are fantastic. We are so excited to have her here today to talk about qualitative and mixed methods in asynchronous and remote settings. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Bull to share her slides.
Great, thank you so much. I'm gonna start sharing in just a moment and wanted to say thank you for participating today. It's so great to see some names and faces for folks that I have not seen in a couple of years. And I'm going to have a little bit of a disclaimer and a reminder of how humbling working in technology is. Just as we were trying to get set up today, I realized I'm not capable of going into presenter mode and having my slides advance. So I have to do kind of a rather clumsy presentation with not in slideshow, but advancing the slides this way. So of course, this always happens to me as a technology researcher, not being able to fully take advantage of the technology. But anyway, today I'm going to be talking about how we can use technology and data collection for mixed methods data in our health-related research, both in asynchronous as well as remote settings. So my objectives today are to really get us all on the same page in terms of what we think of when we are talking about technology-based data collection, why you would use technology for data collection, and then focus more specifically on 3 methods that may be less familiar to you. I think many in the audience will have utilized a lot of the technologies that are becoming more and more common for things like surveys and focus groups. I'm not going to talk about those, but I'll talk about 3 methods N of 1 trials, just-in-time adaptive interventions, otherwise known as JEDIs, or consensus methods, two of which are very similar, nominal group technique and Delphi method. Thinking about how you would put some of these together in a mixed methods study, and then closing up with some cautions and considerations. So specifically, when we're thinking about what is technology-based data collection, I wanted to get everybody on the same page here and thinking about where technology is the primary mechanism to gather either quantitative or qualitative data, or both, as you would do in a mixed methods study. And many of you are going to be familiar with these tools, especially survey-based tools or software that's designed for online self-administered or interviewer-administered data collection. So many use REDCap, for example, or Qualtrics. On the left there, you see some examples of that. Certainly, a platform like we're using right now, Zoom, for a video conference where you can record a qualitative interview, for example. You can do text-based data collection through using text messages. And then increasingly, we're seeing the use of technology for passive data collection, where the participant is not actually answering questions or providing self-reported data, but rather you're pulling data from some source that they have that's continuously collecting data. So a good example is a smartwatch or anything that uses Bluetooth that could track your movement or your sleep or other things like that. But passive data collection methods are becoming more and more common in our research. So just some thoughts about why we would do this. Certainly, it has been more and more common in the past 10 to 15 years. It offers a level of convenience for participants. So if you think about qualitative methods, for example, convening a focus group synchronously online through Zoom like this may offer a much greater level of convenience for your participants. They don't have to drive somewhere, they don't have to find parking, they don't have to take extra time beyond what is their actual participation in a session. It certainly may be also convenient for your investigators for them to also not have to travel. And certainly ease of recording data for later analysis. So for qualitative and quantitative, if users are inputting the data or you're able to record it through technology, it can make that process a little bit easier. So for example, a recording of a qualitative session like a Zoom session that is a synchronous focus group can then be transcribed using voice to text kind of technologies, for example. If you're doing self-reported survey research, there's not a need for things like double data entry in order to ensure there's a reduction of mistakes. So that leads to some experiences where data quality are typically high. There's been some research doing this where people actually have acknowledged that they're more likely to be forthcoming with a technology-mediated system rather than through interviewers, for example. The other big advantage is it's possible to enlarge your samples, get many more people, and get a much more diverse sample, particularly in terms of geography. If you can get people not just in Denver or not in Colorado, but regionally and even nationally or internationally. It's also very possible to target your recruitment to be, very specific to a particular group. That's not unique to technology, but it is an advantage. So as I mentioned, and as people on this session are likely very familiar with tools that have been already developed in software systems that are really widely used now, particularly for survey research, things like Qualtrics, SurveyMonkey, Google Sheets, Google Forms is another tool, Capterra, for example. And then certainly using the platforms like video conferencing platforms for focus groups, for in-depth interviews. Any video conference platform can be used for that. And then, as I mentioned, passive data collection. So data extraction through tools that are using Bluetooth to document movements of people. More recently, we've seen the utilization of multiple data sources that pull on open source data, things like census data that can look at census tracts and identify, the largest proportion of a particular demographic that's in a census tract, and then looking at people from your data sets that are in that census tract to triangulate data or use multiple data sources. So I'll dive into a few types of methods where using technology can actually potentially enhance the quality or the type of data that you're able to get. And these are things that you may be less familiar with, but they operate in much the same way as, say, surveys or focus groups or in-depth interviews. So N of 1 interviews, these are called within subject interviews. So you're using each participant to compare to themselves when you're collecting data. We've utilized this, I'm going to give an example in a minute, for formative research. It's not exclusively used for formative research, but it can be very helpful in a formative way to really understand and iteratively get information about an intervention that you're developing or an approach to surveillance or recruitment or retention of participants. So it's designed to identify the optimal approach or treatment or protocol that you would get for each individual. So I'm going to share an experience that we had from a study that we have ongoing now. It's called the NUDGE trial. And in NUDGE, what we're exploring is that whether or not there is efficacy in the use of optimized text messages or a chat bot to help people improve their adherence to medication refill for cardiac medication. And so the goal here is to reduce the gaps in time that it takes people to refill their medication. So it's not medication adherence in terms of taking the medication, but a step prior to that. And that is getting the meds refilled so that medication can be taken consistently and correctly. So what we're doing is we're testing whether or not an optimized text message or a message that is based in health communication principles for persuasive communication can be offer an improvement over generic text messages or no other communication to help people refill their medications sooner. So for the N of 1 trials in this study, our colleague Joy Waftel led this process. And the recruitment for this happened pre-pandemic, actually, and recruited participants for the N of 1 trials in person. And then interviews were conducted synchronously using Zoom online and the video conference platform. We sent participants examples of the types of messages that we wanted them to react to ahead of time, and then we went through those messages during each interview. It was recorded on Zoom, and we tried to understand a little bit about what people like and dislike in terms of the persuasive content for messages. This was 60 interviews with 20 people at each of 3 sites, Denver Health, the VA, and UC Health. So I like to think of this approach and in N of 1 as when you go to the optometrist or ophthalmologist and they put you in that seat where you're looking through the lenses and they say, which is better for you to see? Do you like A better or B better? Do you like B better or C better? Or do you like A better or C better? And the idea here is we would give people versions of the same message. So different versions of the same message. So basically, it's time to get your medications refilled. And in this one, we're comparing one type of persuasion to another. And the second one, for example, has a little emoji. And the first one is just a prompt or a nudge. And then here we also have more of a sympathetic kind of version in version C. And then we compare A to C. And what we would do this with everyone, and then we would be able to track, the overall kind of reaction that people had and how people would score on something like that. And then this could be used as a little database to track really people's reactions to message types. And in general, this helped us to, really hold in that database the types of reactions and a general sense of what people liked and what people resonated with. We also were able to see what people didn't like. And in this case, there's some examples here. The first two show our emojis. People really did not like emojis on a text message coming from their provider. If you've done work in social media or mobile or digital health, you might be familiar with this. This comes up a lot where people don't want providers or people who are, considered experts to be using things that are considered cute or cutesy or something that would use slang. They want us to appear professional. And then in the third, we got the feedback that, this is intended from a health communication theoretical perspective to evoke a norm or some sense that people like you are successful and you can be too in medication adherence. But it just served to confuse people. They wondered who Joe was and why are you telling me about Joe? So ultimately, the system really helped us get the work done very quickly. It helped us to really be able to very quickly go back and review and understand really what themes and patterns were emerging, and similar to focus group discussion, what kind of outliers were present. So JEDI, just-in-time adaptive interventions, they're not exclusive. Well, they are used during an intervention. And if you look on the right there in this graphic, the circle in the middle is really where we're focused here. It's an opportunity for you to use qualitative or quantitative data to deliver the right aspect of an intervention at the right time in the right amount. Now, JEDIs are not exclusively done in a technology-mediated environment, but certainly technology specific data or data collected using technology can certainly help with decisions in JEDI trials very, very quickly. And so it can involve both qualitative and quantitative. I'll just briefly describe three examples. The first is a focus. It's called the focus study. It was done for the management of schizophrenia. And it's a smartphone application. So participants would get alerts 3 times daily. And the adaptive piece could be specific to the individual. So it could be tailored on the individual's specific needs. So one person might need more focus on medication adherence, where another might need more focus on sleeping or mood, for example. And the alert would come and just do a quick check-in. How are you doing? Have you taken your meds? Yes or no? And if the answer is yes, no further intervention is needed. If the answer is no, then the system needs to branch and send someone to some specific intervention to help them get those medications. HS is another that also uses a smartphone application. It helps to support people in recovery from substance use addictions. And in addition to the types of things used in the focus study that are focused on a cognitive behavioral therapy model, they also use GIS. So this is that passive data collection. So people understand ahead of time, having filled out surveys, where are some geographic locations that risk triggering their substance use. So perhaps if they're in a particular neighborhood and that's where one of their favorite bars is, when their smartphone senses that they're entering that neighborhood, it can send an alert. The person does not have to do anything. The alert comes automatically when those passive data sense that there is an event that might trigger them. And then Sit Coach is another example. It's something that we all might benefit from, where you can program a system to give you an alert when you've been using your keyboard for 30 minutes or more uninterrupted. So it's an alert to stand up. So in these cases, the reliance is on two elements, the just-in-time and the adaptive. So the just-in-time is sending the right message at the right time. It's tailored to the individual, and it's specific with active or passive engagement. So the HS was an example of the passive, and then active could be through the focus study, for example, just to check in, how are you doing? And the timing can be multiple times a day. It could be just once a week. It could be very periodic, like once a month. It just depends on what your goals are. The adaptive piece is altering the pathway of an intervention depending on the responsiveness of an individual, whether it's active or their circumstances. So the last one there, the Sit Coach, is something that you wouldn't even get any kind of intervention if you're up and moving more frequently than every 30 minutes, for example. So those are things that happen within the intervention, and it's using data that are technology-based to drive those differences. So within Nudge, we have some aspects of JEDI. So one is that everyone is enrolled in Nudge who is in one of our 3 healthcare delivery systems and prescribed a particular set of medications. And they would only get a Nudge message. So the adaptive piece, they would only get a Nudge message if they actually do not refill that medication on time. And the just-in-time piece is the message delivery happens when that default or when they fail to get their medication on time. So when they have a refill gap, that's what we call it, of greater than or equal to 7 days, they'll automatically, if they're in that intervention arm, get sent one of the messages. Now, there's another adaptive piece there where one of our arms is looking at a chat bot, and depending on how they engage with that chat bot, the message will be different. And so those are some ways that we see that those technology data collection being deployed during that study. Another kind of resource for us in Nudge is our log. So we have a log for our interventions arms, which are a chatbot and a text message delivery system. And it just gives us, the time of day, what was sent, and the actual messages that were sent. So here on the bottom left is the message from the system. And then the red dot in the middle is the response from the patient. And then the top is the response from the system again. This is all automated. And so it allows you to use some of that passive data to continue moving the intervention forward. Our system is automated. In this case, the patient has to take action and provide data. The nominal group technique. So the way it operationalizes for data collection and technology-based data collection would be essentially identical to using a video conference platform, either synchronously or asynchronously with participants. But the way it differs from focus group discussions or in-depth interviews is it's not intended to identify the universe of opinions or ideas as much as it is to get consensus. So with focus groups or in-depth interviews, you want to identify what is a whole range of ideas and what are the outliers, and you're really going to summarize what those are. The idea with nominal group technique is really more to get people to provide a consensus on what ideas you're going to use to move forward. So again, this is something that could be very useful in formative research. It has 4 steps. So in the first step, you just reflect on the topic. What do you think of using technology for data collection, and get people to think about it. The round robin has people, doing a popcorn of ideas and sharing ideas. Clarification is when the facilitator or other people in the group clarify what they meant during the round robin. And then the fourth and final is the ranking. What is the top preference, and in what order, by whom? And so it allows you to quickly boil down into a summary of ideas. This can be done synchronously or asynchronously. I'm going to share with you how we did this asynchronously through utilizing an online discussion board. And this was to design a program for young gay men or men who were bisexual or questioning around HIV prevention. And they were recruited through online social media ads, which is another element of data collection online. Rather than recruiting face-to-face, you can recruit through social media. You can also recruit, as we have done through the Nudge study, for example, from within clinic databases, and I can go into that in a little bit. But for this one, we recruited people through online social media. We had them respond to prompts on discussion boards that really followed this small group nominal technique approach, getting their ideas in general, and then giving people an opportunity to get clarification, and then having them rank the ideas about how we should design. It was a text message program generally. The Delphi method is another form of getting consensus. It's often used with a panel of experts, not exclusively, but that's often how you'll see it presented in the literature. And within the Delphi method, it's also a structured group method like the nominal group technique, but it more often will employ both qualitative and quantitative. It employs multiple iterations of questionnaires, and so people will answer a first phase or a first round of survey data or surveys, and then they will be provided with information like what you see on the right. That shows what the mean score was on items and what were some comments, so that there's some qualitative data there. And so people can reflect on what they're seeing. Panels can be of variable size. You can have a small number, 5 people, you could have 100 people. And you can utilize some of the tools like Qualtrics or RedCap, for example, to gather data. And some of those tools, like the survey tools, are very helpful in being able to present data back. So I'm not necessarily endorsing any one tool over another, but Qualtrics has nice features where it can summarize the data graphically and present that nicely for folks. So now I'm going to talk about how you would put all of this together, and here thinking about all the different phases of a research study. So from the formative all the way through evaluation to then potentially dissemination and adaptation for other groups or other environments. So if you think about it, you could use any of these, and this is not the only combination. But for formative work, using focus groups or in-depth interviews or N-of-1 interviews, you could use a nominal group technique if what you're trying to do is get some consensus on what is the best approach for your intervention. Certainly, it's not limited to intervention research. If you're trying to design a cohort study and you want to understand what's the best way to recruit people, what's the best way to retain them, what are incentives that we should use, what happens if we lose people, things like that. Implementation itself, JEDI is a growing approach that people are using more frequently for things where you want to do adaptations on the fly, where you want to be continually improving your intervention. Now, of course, since my focus is on mobile and digital health, this is of critical importance in our field because of the rapid pace of technology and the evolution of technology. We're hampered by a traditional NIH trajectory where it takes 2 years plus to get funding, 5 more years to run your trial that cannot be adapted, and then by the end, you're producing results that may actually be obsolete. That's happened to us actually a few times in over the years of my doing research. And so a JEDI during implementation allows you to really stay on top of what's emerging in the field if you're in mobile and digital health. Use of passive data during implementation can be very helpful for you. And then open source, that utilization of things like census data or other open source data that could be available to supplement or augment the data that you're getting from your participants. Certainly for evaluation, the use of online surveys, but in-depth interviews is another way to understand a little bit more about why did we see the results that we did? What are your ideas, or what is your feedback from your participants? Thinking about dissemination, how can you get the findings out there? Thinking that utilizing a Delphi method, a panel of experts, people who are really closely in touch with your population, or are clinicians, for example, and they want to disseminate it through their own systems. Using that Delphi method might be helpful. And then finally, for adaptation, you're essentially back. I could have used this in a circular format, back to that formative work, thinking about, all right, it's worked in a different population. Now we need to adapt it for a different geographic region or a different audience that may have different demographic characteristics. You can also use N-of-1 or, again, nominal group techniques there. So just thinking about some cautions here, I'm very enthusiastic about using technology for data collection and also in research for mobile and digital health, but it's not without its problems, of course, and it's very critical to be careful when you're doing this. For qualitative work, it can be quite difficult to establish a rapport online. If you're, seeking to collect data asynchronously, for example, it could be even harder. So you have to think about ways to establish rapport online. We've gotten feedback over and over again that it's really critical to, establish your credibility, help people understand who you are, provide them information about what you're doing ahead of time. Be very clear about your informed consent, where they can go for help, and then really following through on any kind of customer service approach that you have. So if you give them a number, call me if you have any questions or complaints or concerns, or if you don't want to call me, you can call someone else. Making sure that there is someone on the other end of that to be responsive. Those are some key considerations for particularly qualitative work, but it holds true for quantitative work as well. Participants who are using technology for data collection are often very concerned about security and confidentiality, and being very clear up front about how data are collected. In particular, you can utilize tools like REDCap, for example, and now Qualtrics is adhering, and many other companies that have quantitative survey software in particular are very aware of HIPAA regulations and want to make sure that people understand that they are HIPAA compliant, but really helping people understand what is being done with data, how they're being protected, who has access to them, how they can pull out if they want to later on, how their confidentiality is going to be assured. Nevertheless, even if you do this, there is often fraud, and there's a growing literature about how to address fraud and how to be responsive to fraud. So I won't go into a lot of detail here, but there are some strategies that I would say best practices include developing a fraud protocol ahead of time. So that could include things like making sure that data come from a single IP address and that IP address is not replicated in your data set. Making sure that data are completed in a reasonable time frame, so that somebody isn't, repeating the survey 200 times in a 24-hour period, for example. There are actually bots out there that can be programmed to do that, especially if people have gotten a hold of what the eligibility criteria are. And then they can just, program a bot to take your survey over and over again. So you have to have a protocol in place, or it's best practice to do that so that you can be able to track or identify fraud where it is, and then determine how you're going to address that, either by removing them from the data set or adjusting some of your security protocols. So the last things I'll leave you with are some further considerations. Once again, although I'm enthusiastic about technology, it's really critical to think about technology for the convenience of your participants over your investigators. So who are you working with and what are their preferences? So even though, this new and shiny technology tool could be a great way to reach people, if the people that you're trying to reach aren't familiar with it, or they have to go through multiple steps to download it or log on or, provide a password, with each one of those steps, you're going to lose the opportunity to maximize and optimize your enrollment and keep your participants over time. So you have to make it as easy and attractive as possible and work with the preferences of the people that you're working with. So, that holds true for things like making it appropriate for literacy, or making it appropriate in primary language for folks. Making sure that if people are going to be providing data over a phone, that you look at that, how the data collection platform looks on the phone, so that it's not running off the page or it's not difficult to participate in. The reliability and validity holds true in technology the same way as it would in face-to-face research as well. What we are seeing is a great deal of opportunity for us to look at not only the reliability, but validity. So in a lot of my research, I've looked at STI and HIV prevention. There is now, and there's always been a criticism of, people's self-report for sexual risk behavior and sexual health outcomes. There's now a growing reliance on the use of self-collected swabs for data for studies that require biomedical assessments, for example. I'm sure many, if not everybody on this call, has done a self-collected COVID test, and recognizing that that's becoming more common. Certainly, that's a great example for COVID, that the sensitivity of some of the home tests has been called into question. So as we're moving into more of that, you have to take a look at how reliable and valid those measures are. And then can you replicate some of the strategies that you're using in new settings with new populations? And then ultimately, pragmatism. Really, I would encourage everybody to let your research questions drive and your participants drive the choices in technology and not the other way around. Just because there's a new great tool doesn't mean it's the right one for you or for your research. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm happy to answer any questions or if people have comments. I know there was some in the chat.
I'm thinking maybe April 4th.
So Sarah Leslie asked, software system is used for the nudge study, tracking and automated messaging. We're using a program called Mobile Messenger, and you do have to pay a institutional license for Mobile Messenger, but it's like Twilio, if you're familiar with that, or there are other, kind of large scale automated text messaging platforms that are out there. I'm trying to think, Easy Text is one of them. There are a lot of these text message based platforms that you can get for a subscription or, a per message cost. So it's a little bit less expensive than what we're doing for Mobile Messenger.
Thank you so much, Sheana. This was a fantastic presentation. I really appreciate it. And as you mentioned, we have plenty of time for discussion and Q&A. If you do need to go, we ask that you please do the evaluation. Madonna's put the link in the chat here. And so we really value your input and hope that you will do our evaluation for us. So with that, if anyone has questions, you can put them in the chat. You can take yourself off mute and ask your question live, however you would like to do that. So we have a question here. What are the issues you can face with using tracking devices to get participants' data? I would assume ethical, logistics, scientific.
Yeah, for sure. It would be the same that you would have for any other kind of IRB consideration. You need to get people's permission to get any kind of tracking information. The only time when I would say that you're not going to need, and this isn't relevant to tracking, but if you used open source data. So if you wanted to use, census level data to compare people within a particular census tract, for example, and those participants that are enrolled in your study who are in that census tract. But if you're going to use anything that is Bluetooth on their phone that tracks their steps or their sleep or other things, you do need their permission. There is, that Apple Health Kit for iOS systems on a phone where people can a priori provide permission for their data to be used by investigators. And where I've seen that done is investigators will use that for secondary data analysis, not specific to a particular research trial. If you're going to use that in a research trial, you would still need to get their permission.
And Brad Morris asks, in working with specific stigmatized populations remotely and asynchronously, as in you've never had a face-to-face interaction, are you concerned about the quality of the results when we can't be 100% certain that we're eliciting information from those we intend to engage? So for instance, using MTurk, and we're doing a project on user-centered design with transgender individuals. I say we because I work with Brad on that. So how do you deal with that? I don't really know you are who you say you are.
Yeah. I think it's a really important point, and I appreciate that you brought that up, Brad. I think that for technology-based work, the same principles for community-engaged research apply. And I would suggest that you would probably be much better off if you had any number of things. One could be an advisory group that you already have relationships with and they already know you, and it could consist of experts in the field or people who are from the community where you want to work or people who are leaders in that community. and they can be providing you with some advice and guidance on, data collection for people that you've never met. Certainly, we have always, experienced, or often, perhaps not always, often experienced instances of fraud where we're pretty sure that people are not who they say they are. And there are things that you can do if you're very concerned about that, to have people, provide a driver's license, or show up, turn on their camera for an interview. I think some of those may be less feasible or appealing, or may even backfire if you're doing it with highly marginalized groups. And there, I think really relying on your community organization or your advisory group to help you. Other ways they can do it is to send an advance communication. This person is going to be contacting you. We are working with them, and maybe that's through email, or you can go to a community organization and do a presentation ahead of time. Any way that you would do for a face-to-face study to gain some credibility and, get that authority so that people can trust you, I think are good strategies that apply here as well.
Absolutely. And Brad's referencing a project where we're trying all different sorts of things to try to recruit people who are transgender for a project. We have an advisory board partnering with one in Colorado, and this MTurk strategy is just one of the options, and it's has its pros and cons, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Let's see. So there's a couple questions specific to your projects you presented. So let me go to Gretchen's first. So do you recommend having an mHealth consultant or expert on a study if you're new to using it in your research?
Okay, so I think I'm pretty biased, so I'm not sure that I'm the only source you should consult here. I would say yes. What we've realized over the years is that, I started in the field doing HIV and STI prevention work, reproductive health in general, and then I moved into mobile and digital health. And because mobile and digital health is really, I consider it a set of methods. It's really more of a methodological approach. You could consider your mHealth consultant a methodologist. And so we apply mobile and digital health to chronic disease interventions, or infectious disease interventions, or surveillance, for example, cohort studies. And because the field moves so quickly and evolves so quickly, the things that you might be pretty familiar with today as just a consumer in the 21st century could change very, very quickly. And some of our research has become obsolete, so much so that we had to change right in the middle of our trial. And an mHealth consultant can help you avoid that, really understand what populations are using right now, what populations will resonate with what technology, what are the types of methods you should use for data collection and for analysis. So I think that they can be very helpful and allow you to just focus on the topic that you're an expert in. Say you're, an injury expert, you get to be an injury expert. Say you're a infectious disease expert, you get to be that, right? And you can look to your mHealth consultant as the methodologist.
So Stan Zeffler asks, acknowledges excellent presentation. Could see where the refill reminder system could have logistical challenges in terms of timing a reminder related to initial prescription time and refills. Have you figured out a strategy, or what does that look like? How do you do that?
So, sorry, I'm not sure I completely understood. Time to prescription refill, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, how do you time the reminder relative to the initial prescription time and the refills?
Yeah. Yeah, got it. So here's another kind of way we're using technology is that we have linked into the pharmacy records for these systems. So fortunately for the VA and Denver Health, they both have in-house pharmacies. UC Health does as well. The added wrinkle with UC Health is many people don't refill their prescriptions at UC Health. Rather, they use Walgreens or Rite Aid or CVS, whatever. But there is a national company called SureScripts that does track when those refills are made at those external sites. And so the pharmacy data are downloaded on a daily basis, and people who are enrolled in our study are tracked. And so if I'm getting a medication and I'm due for a refill, the system knows from those pharmacy data whether or not I have refilled or not. And then when it hits 7 days after my refill, being due, and I haven't done so yet, then it moves into sending the messages. So we're reliant on the pharmacy records and the pharmacy database, but that's another passive form of data collection, if you will.
Yeah, this is Stan Zeffler. I got one of those reminders the other day about prescription, and it was actually a useful reminder because, you know, sometimes you go into these systems and you can refill one thing, but you can't refill another. And this one was pretty timely, but it just, as you presented it, it made me wonder, you know, you could get somebody who's non-adherent and you'd have to time it so that you're just not sending annoying text, but it's an interesting concept.
Actually, let me, I just wanted to jump in, and that made me think about another kind of consideration or caution. We're starting to see a little bit around message fatigue and reminder fatigue. And so I think you bring up a really good point. Here's another way that, you know, you can think about working with mHealth experts is that these things are coming up for us where we're seeing people who are relying on text messages in particular. And our colleague John Steiner did some of this work at Kaiser, where they looked at Kaiser populations who were getting text message reminders. And they, after they had about 9 reminders in a 6-month period, they started opting out. So you could run the risk of, turning people off, annoying them.
Yeah. Along the same lines is this other question about how do you manage opt-in for text messaging, about that interface with participants? How do you do that?
Yeah, so actually we're working on this right now. We've actually designed a chat bot for COVID vaccine hesitancy, for example. And basically what we're having to do is work with healthcare delivery systems and have them send out like a blast text message or email or a message through the patient portal and invite them to use the system. And so we've tried a number of different ways. We tried on Facebook, and that was a bad idea for anything related to the COVID vaccine because we got trolled immediately. But really the opt-in probably works in the same way that it does for face-to-face kinds of interventions. You just have to use maximum opportunities to reach people and engage with them and try and persuade them to use your tool or your idea.
What kind of, incidentally, what kind of response rate do you get for people actually acknowledging those invitation blasts? Do you know?
I think it's highly variable given the population and the topic and where it's coming from. I mean, I think like Brad's question beforehand, you probably could do better if you're connected to a respected, leader in the community. For Nudge, for example, we initially sent out written letters in the mail to everybody who could potentially be eligible. And those letters came from their primary care provider. And in that case, we had very few opt-outs, but that was designed as an opt-out trial rather than an opt-in trial.
Let's see, we just have a couple more minutes here. So Susan Neumeyer asked, we're planning a project using photo elicitation with health workers in low and middle income countries, but gathering a group may not be easy. Any suggestions other than an online discussion board for how to generate consensus asynchronously?
So that's a great question, Susan. I mean, you might try like a multiple small groups if you wanted to do it. If you can't, if you have to do everything 100% asynchronously, you could send out a link and ask people to complete a poll where, you know, they rank order, you know, their favorites, for example. Or you could do multiple small groups. So maybe if you could convene 3 to 5 people and have them in one group, and then you can do another set of 3 to 5 if you could do some synchronous work.
And how would one get in touch with you? How would one request a consult with the Impact Lab?
Yeah, so you can just email me directly, or I see, Bethany, I think you posted our website. We're in the middle of updating our website. So probably email me directly is the easiest thing. I'll just put my email in the chat.
So we are out of time for today. I just want to thank you, Sheana, for coming and presenting today. This was fantastic. This has been recorded. We will be posting the archives on our Course Education website. And I will make sure that that you get Jenny's question in the chat here so that maybe you can respond to her directly about how you evaluate these interventions. It's probably not a short answer. So thank you everyone for attending. Please do the evaluation. We really appreciate it and hope to see you next month. Thank you.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you, Sheana.